How is everyone doing today? And welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and this is a segment that we have called Bible Decode, number 556. And we look at little known aspects of the Bible, things that you have to go down a rabbit hole to get, and that they're not going to be discussed by your priests, pastors, popes, rabbis, or ministers. Probably not your friends and family either. And a lot of it is Bible directly from the Bible, but some of it is like meta Bible, books about the Bible and, interpretive methods. And I've kind of gone with the all of the above approach. You know, different people have different interpretations of the Bible and methods of interpretation, and sometimes they are mutually exclusive. But I basically accept all of them at face value until they, um, don't have any type of explanatory power. But, I do believe that the Bible is rife with layer upon layer upon layer of meaning. And so, you know, you could break the code of the Bible, but somebody else might break the code in an entirely different way, and you both could be right. So, I'm trying to, focus on many different methods of interpretation, but I have been focused on, for a while, the Roman origins hypothesis. That is, that the true authors of the New Testament were the Roman Caesars of the late first century, and the New Testament of the Bible is a psychological operation that the Romans were conducting uh, at the Jews, against the Jews. The Romans and the Jews have been fighting war after war, battle after battle, insurrection, revolts, uprisings for over a century. And I think the Romans were getting kind of tired of it. It started maybe even affecting their entire empire because it gave ideas to other groups of people under their empire. And that was a sticking point for the Romans because they didn't have the kind of resources to, manage all of the different tribes of people that lived under their umbrella. And they knew that if one revolted, maybe the other, that could start a domino effect. Um, and like the domino theory of, anti-communism time, um, the Romans also, this program was very much like the Manhattan Project. Um, it was all hands on deck. Every intellectual in the Roman Empire who was a court historian, a court poet, court writer, I believe they all were kind of involved in this writing project that lasted for certainly at least 25 years, probably more like 75 years, and probably extended and has extended all the way, maybe even up to the present day. Um, but the Romans basically were trying to hijack the Jewish Messiah. They believed that the Jewish Messiah and that those ideas, along with Judaism itself, was extremely separatist, xenophobic. They thought they were the chosen people. They didn't want to mix with other people. And this was all, high maintenance for the Romans. They wanted you to get with the program and assimilate with the empire. And they knew the Jews were waiting on a Messiah any day now that was going to come and help the Jews overthrow the Romans. And so instead, the Romans wrote a fictional story about a Jewish Messiah named Jesus who was a Prince of Peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar or walking the extra mile and turning the other cheek, and also believed in a more universalist approach or globalist approach in terms of being very lax about the Roman traditions and rituals, the observance of the Sabbath, the kosher food laws, the circumcision, the stricture against graven images. These are all things that both Jesus and Paul, um, flaunted. They didn't do them. They got, challenged for not performing these rituals. Also, the Jesus in the Romans' estimation was a son of God, which is not what the Jews had in mind, and but it was exactly what pagan belief systems for thousands of years had mythologized. All of the pagan heroes and you know messiahs have been sons of God, come down and perform miracles and healings, and they are unjustly um, accused and martyred. They also provided a lot of wisdom, but then they were martyred and they went back to um, heaven, or, back to God. And so this is a template uh, for heathen or pagan religious all over the world, and it should be a red flag for anybody who's really trying to scrutinize what they're reading when they read the New Testament. Also, the fact that the New Testament was originally written in Greek is also a big red flag. But there are so many red flags that, you know, how many does it take before it becomes mathematically impossible? Anyway, we are reading from a text called Creating Christ: How the Romans Invented Christianity by James Valliant and C.W. Fahy. And we're getting close to the end of this book, but we're in part two, chapter 4. And, you know, um, I'll just let them go and maybe try to explain it as it goes along. Christianity urges complete obedience to authority, paying taxes, going the extra mile for the Romans, universal inclusion, making peace, etc. Right down the Romans' alley. That's what the Romans wanted the Jews to be doing. Seen as a form of moral idealism, these ideas are never suspected of being part of a political agenda promoted by Roman governors and their client kings, all of whom are shown in a positive light in the Gospels and the book of Acts. And yet the teachings of the Gospels are never recognized as expressing the same Flavian agenda. The Flavians are the dynasty of Roman emperors. They're between 69 and 96 AD, who wrote at least the Gospels. That expressing the same Flavian agenda that is expressed by the Flavian's own hagiographer Josephus. And you probably know of Josephus as the contemporary historian who corroborates the existence of Jesus, the first such case outside of the scriptures. However, you may not know that Josephus, his name is actually Flavius Josephus, and he was an adopted member of the Flavian dynasty, lived at Caesar's palace, and was the court historian for the Romans. And so when you use his and weaponize uh, his testimonium, this paragraph that he wrote corroborating the existence of Jesus, um, you're exposing yourself because um, in reality, Josephus is very powerful evidence against the existence of Jesus. But that one little part is um, uh, arguing in the other direction until you decode it, and then it becomes even more damning. And that decode was done by Joseph Atwill in his book Caesar's Messiah. Um, he shows that those three paragraphs, the testimonium and the paragraph before and after, that they are all three parts of a satire. And that's kind of the style that the Romans used: ridicule, satire, mockery, along with a fair amount of pornography, um, as well as a ton of mythology and stoicism, and really the kitchen sink. The Romans put everything into this that they possibly could, and it goes layer upon layer upon layer deep. It they must have put it. It's a masterpiece of evil. Like the paradox of Jesus' proclamation that his glorious second coming would arrive precisely when the Roman army leveled the temple under Titus, and Josephus's own claim that his imperial master was the Jewish Messiah, that being Vespasian and Titus, the Roman emperors. In order to solve all of these problems, all we really need to do is stop resisting history and accept it at face value. If agents of the Roman state authored the Gospels, then what other evidence could we expect but precisely the evidence that we have? And that's really my main thing here, is that this Roman origins hypothesis is so straightforward, and it's exactly what the Romans would have done. And you hear these Christians just contorting the scriptures and just twisting it into their favor, uh, to be able to rationalize their own beliefs when it's just right there in front of you. All you have to do is read the words, and you can, a little more than that, but you can see who actually wrote this. It doesn't take a detective. And that's why this is a very much of a um, condemnation of the Christian truther movement. You people are supposed to be about truth, but I have heard nary a word about any of this Roman origins hypothesis over 10 years of following you people. And uh, I know personally of at least a dozen books that purport the theory. So don't tell me that you haven't, you're unfamiliar with it, or you haven't done, you probably are unfamiliar with it, but you haven't done the digging, because even just 5 minutes of digging will, you know, reveal a half dozen books that are all convincing in their own way. The Romans recognized that it would be impossible to eliminate Jewish devotion to their God or persuade them to relinquish their hope in a Messiah who would deliver them. Rather than attempting to destroy their enemies' ideas completely, it is perfectly logical that they would attempt to rechannel their culture into a pro Roman direction, combining an ideological assault with their military assault. Romans are known to have employed highly sophisticated intelligence gathering, psyops, agent provocateurs, and propaganda as an integral part of their military operations. Romans were self-conscious about the religious changes they brought to their empire, and they were pragmatic about the public purpose religion served. The Roman government was quite accomplished at setting up elaborately organized and funded cults to celebrate emperors as gods, having already done so for three previous Caesars. As we have seen, their ideology was lavishly celebrated on their coinage, often the one form of archaeological evidence that survives the passage of time and the meddling of revisionists. We have seen how those coins preserve a catalog of virtues reflected in the New Testament. In addition to Titus's coin that has an anchor with a fish wrapped around it, which is exactly the same symbol set that early Christians used until they adopted the cross in the 4th century. The Emperor Claudius wrote a treatise on the religious changes that had occurred during the reign of Augustus. Like all the works of Claudius, this work did not survive the long period of time when only Christian monks copied and thus preserved or didn't preserve the great literature of antiquity. And yet, presumably, one of the important topics Claudius addressed in his writings was the arrival of the imperial cult in its first form, the cult of the divine Julius, which would serve as a model and foundation for all future imperial administrations. So they're showing that the Romans actually have extensive experience in inventing religions and propping them up. In what is probably the clearest example of the Romans' elaborately organized and funded manipulations of religion for political ends, the Roman Senate officially deified the Caesars Julius, Augustus, Claudius, Vespasian, and Titus by the end of the 1st century. Yet, while it is common for contemporaries to dismiss the authentic piety and sincere devotion these political gods inspired, this is merely a modern prejudice. Indeed, the imperial cult, in its effort to ground the legitimacy of the Roman monarchy in divine favor, was the direct precedent for the Christian belief in the divine right of kings, which was used to validate the authority of European monarchs until the 17th century in King Louis XIV. The Romans endured because they were relatively flexible as a society, willing to add to their citizens and senators political elites from an ever-widening circle of conquered territories. They absorbed rather than destroyed the cultures of the nations they conquered. The first great example was their adoption of the culture and religion of the Greek kingdoms, which they had started to conquer. Ironically, in their conquest of the Greeks, Romans were employing a political tactic they had adopted from Greek conquerors like Alexander, welcoming the religious ideas of Hellenized cultures and readily identifying Greek gods with their own deities. This practice is vividly revealed in the cult of the divine Julius Caesar, who claimed a descent from Aeneas, a Trojan hero of the most ancient Greek epic, the Iliad. Aeneas was not only a Trojan prince, but a son of the goddess Aphrodite. The Julian family claimed that after the fall of Troy, Aeneas led a group of Trojans to the shores of central Italy, where he established the Latin tribe that was a progenitor of ancient Rome. The Julians thus claimed to be descendants of Aeneas's son, Iulus, making them living descendants of the Greek goddess of love herself. The first dynasty of Roman emperors thus blatantly used foreign religion to establish the legitimacy of their rule over their newly conquered subjects. This is how the Romans conducted war. What we have been observing is the second dynasty of Roman emperors, the Flavii, employing exactly the same tactic regarding Jewish traditions after conquering Judea, albeit with much more lasting effect. Just like the family of Roman monarchs who had preceded them, the Flavians utilized a foreign religion to demonstrate their divine favor and legitimacy as rulers over conquered people. It would have been strange if they did not do this, given the precedent set by the first imperial dynasty, which they used as their model. Indeed, the Flavians actually co opted elements of Greek and Egyptian and Jewish religion in various forms for their own propaganda purposes, as we have seen. The Gospels were just one part of that project, one aimed at a single, if critical, part of their diverse imperial audience, and one so effective as a device of religious statecraft that it outlived the entire Roman Empire. Okay, I think maybe we'll try a couple more paragraphs. Let's see where we're at here. Okay. Contributing to our modern ignorance of the New Testament's historical context, not to mention the Old Testament, Hollywood's retellings of the Gospels have painted the Romans as the bad guys who really killed Jesus. Gee, I wonder if that's because they're Jews. Hollywood. Plenty of valid, because that's certainly not in the text. Plenty of valid Christian guilt about anti Semitism and legitimate Jewish fear of the same certainly motivated this Hollywood revisionism. In the wake of the Holocaust, Christian guilt finally came to a climax, and in popular retellings of the Christian story, they uniformly emphasize the Romans' role in the deaths of Jesus and the first Christian martyrs. Such an emphasis, however, is a rewrite of the gospel narratives. As we have seen, and that is what I find with a lot of Christians, their I won't say maybe primary, but at least secondary knowledge of what's in the Bible comes from watching it on a movie or on TV or in a cartoon or some type of uh, you know video that they're not recognizing that these are dramatizations. These are actors. This is not what's, you know, exactly. You can't get your information about what's in the Bible from that kind of a source unless you want to be brainwashed, which, you know, as we have seen over and over again, the bad guys in the New Testament are always the Jews. It should now be obvious why. The Gospels were Roman propaganda generated by their war with the Jews during their epical conflict in the first century. Christian anti-Semitism is no coincidence. The Romans' New Testament was created to veto the Jews' Old Testament. The one notable exception to Hollywood's trend can be seen in the 2004 film by Mel Gibson, The Passion of the Christ. His depiction of the Passion narrative as it is told in the Gospels left Jewish and Christian reviewers aghast at its anti Semitism, with Gibson replying that he was only relating what the Gospels actually say. When it comes to the portrait of the Jews painted by the Gospels, modern Christians are simply in a state of denial. Though recent decades have seen a rewriting of the Gospel accounts in the form of movies and books, the process of cleaning up the anti Semitism in the New Testament actually began long ago. This drift away from the anti Semitic politics of the Gospels can, for example, be seen in the shifting perceptions of Pilate, the Roman governor who ordered Christ's crucifixion. The Gospel stories could not be clearer. After announcing his belief in Jesus' innocence, the Jews respond to Pilate by demanding Jesus' execution 3 times, and only then does Pilate finally relent and accede to their demands. Jesus was convicted of violating Jewish law by Jewish authorities. After unsuccessfully pleading with Jesus to make a defense, any defense, Pilate symbolically washes his hands in a metaphor designed to exonerate the Roman government of his execution. The message is clear. Jesus' message of peaceful acquiescence to Roman rule would never have led to punishment. Matthew's account stresses this by quoting the Jewish crowd as conveniently proclaiming, "His blood is on us and on our children." This is the bloody war to come justified. We already asked it, but we must ask again. Who but the Roman government would have had the motive to exonerate the Roman government? If Jesus' appeal was to all humanity, why should the Gospels explicitly exclude Romans from any culpability in his sacrifice? According to Matthew, even Pilate's wife begs him not to do it. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." Origen, who's one of the church fathers from the 3rd century, Origen actually praises Pilate's wife on this account. And as Saint Procula, Pontius Pilate's spouse, is even venerated by the Greek Orthodox Church to this day and honored on her feast day, October 27th. Pontius Pilate himself is still venerated as a saint by the ancient Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Christians in the Latin speaking West, however, must have rejected such overt admiration of Pontius Pilate early on, since they never venerated him as a saint. Over time, Pilate would become more and more the villain in Christ's fate, as he now appears in most presentations of Christ's passion depicted in the West. If not the Jews, then someone had to take the blame for the murder of Christ. Today, it is invariably the Romans, the very group specifically exonerated by the Gospels, but especially Pilate himself. Okay, we're going to stop right there, and we will move on tomorrow from that location. But like, share, subscribe, comment, and contribute. Thanks for tuning in. And come back tomorrow for another episode of Bible Decode. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.